Good evening. Welcome to the May 24th, 2021 meeting of the Stillwater City Council. At this time, I will call the meeting to order. And up first, we have a proclamation in recognition of National Gun Violence Awareness Day. And I will read this proclamation, and then we have local representatives Diane Tipley and Kelly Goff who will come up to accept it and to say a few words. Whereas every day more than 100 Americans are killed by gun violence, alongside more than 230 who are shot and wounded, and on average there are more than 13,000 gun homicides every year. And whereas Americans are 25 times more likely to die by gun homicide than people in other high-income countries, and whereas Oklahoma averages 711 gun deaths every year with a rate of 18 deaths per 100,000 people, which is the 10th highest rate of gun death in the United States. Whereas cities across the nation, including Stillwater, are working to end senseless violence with evidence-based solutions, and whereas the city of Stillwater is dedicated to protecting the public safety in our community. Whereas gun violence prevention is more important than ever as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to exacerbate gun violence, after more than a year of increased gun sales, increased calls to suicide and domestic violence hotlines, and an increase in gun violence. And whereas in January 2013, Hadia Pendleton was tragically shot and killed at age 15, and on June 4th, 2021, to recognize her 24th birthday, people across the United States will recognize National Gun Violence Awareness Day and wear orange in tribute to Hadia Pendleton and other victims of gun violence and to the loved ones of those victims. And whereas the idea was inspired by a group of Hadia's friends who asked their classmates to commemorate her life by wearing orange. They chose this color because hunters wear orange to announce themselves to other hunters when in the woods, and orange is a color that symbolizes the value of human life. And whereas anyone can join this campaign by pledging to wear orange on Friday, June 4th, 2021, to help raise awareness about gun violence. And whereas we renew our commitment to reduce gun violence and to pledge all we can do to keep firearms out of the wrong hands and encourage responsible gun ownership to help keep children safe. Now, therefore, I, William Joyce, Mayor of the City of Stillwater, on behalf of the City Council and the citizens of the City of Stillwater, hereby declare Friday, June 4th, 2021 to be National Gun Violence Awareness Day in the City of Stillwater, and I encourage all citizens to support our community's efforts to prevent tragic effects of gun violence and to honor and value human lives. Diane? If you could come up to the podium, that would be great so we can hear you.
Pardon my notes, and I won't talk long, but I did want to explain a little bit. This is the 7th year that the Wear Orange Day is being recognized. Last year, Tulsa and Norman and Oklahoma City participated. In Oklahoma City, they lit up the Scissortail Bridge. They lit it up all orange. I think they'll probably do it again this year. It's really kind of cool to see it. And in pre-COVID life, we would do some events with speakers and different groups coming in to talk about how they're working towards reducing gun violence. And I'm part of a volunteer along with Kelly for Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense, but there's a lot of different organizations, Sandy Hook Promise, Brady Campaign, different ones that are taking place in this. This year we're going to have a virtual event, and if anybody's interested online, there'll be some speakers. Let me know, or look up the Oklahoma Moms Demand Action Facebook page and tell you about it. We've got some really incredible people in Oklahoma working on trying to address this as an epidemic in our country. But one of the cool things is, it's sad, but it's cool. We're going to be decorating these bags, and they're calling them bags of belonging. So there's a lady by the name of Sarah Burdine who lost her son. He was like 23 years old in 2012. He was at a sports bar, and somebody started shooting, and he got hit. And she was telling her story, and she was telling how when she went to the police and they handed his belongings over to her, they handed them to her in a brown paper bag, which isn't a reflection on them. But there was an OSU, not an OSU, but an Oklahoma art professor and art therapist who was listening and was touched by that. So she decorated a tote bag in honor of her son, and she gave it to him so she'd have something softer and gentler to receive the belongings in. And so they started decorating these bags, and they're distributing them to law enforcement agencies in central Oklahoma, but now it's starting to grow, and it's going throughout Oklahoma and throughout the country. So that's an event we're going to do either in the park or is on somebody's porch and decorate some bags this year, since we can't really gather for big events. And so I really thank you all for recognizing this. And if you, I know there's many solutions available. Like you said, evidence-based solutions. There's different ways to address this problem. So I just hope that we can agree that change is needed, and that we can commit to finding ways towards the goal of reducing gun violence in our communities. And so I hope on Friday, June 4th, you'll join me in wearing orange, and we'll have another reason to wear orange instead of just Go Pokes. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you and Kelly for your work on this regard. I've got a copy of the proclamation, and we can take a picture if you'd like.
Yes, please. I love my picture. Okay. Make him get in. Thank you very
I'm
much.
not sure the red shirt really fits the occasion.
But it's the mom's color, so. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. That takes us to the only other item on the agenda for tonight. Under General Orders, 3A is a staff presentation and discussion on potential revenue options for citywide projects.
Good evening, Mayor and Councilors. Becky Taylor, Chief Civic Innovation Officer. I'm really excited to be talking to you this evening about this topic of Stillwater-wide projects and potential revenue options. This evening, we hope to articulate the current revenue landscape, current pressing projects, a community engagement plan, and possible funding options. But more than that, I really hope this presentation allows all of us to take a step back and dream of how we want to continue moving Stillwater forward and how we can do better, and how this can just be one step towards a larger culture of movement, reimagining, creativity, and excellence. We have such a unique opportunity and a collective momentum as we are hopefully nearing the end of this global pandemic, not to crawl our way out, but to leap out and to do this together. As we move through this presentation, it is meant to provide a high-level information, knowing that each and every one of these topics can be a presentation all in itself. And many of the experts are in this room and are here to answer any questions you may have or provide any information you need for you to ultimately give us direction in how you wish we move forward. It is going to take all of us working together to invest in municipal excellence, and it's time to do just that. We are bringing this forward to you this evening to meet the goals of our newly adopted strategic plan, complete with a new mission and vision. Everything we do as a city works towards building a vibrant community for every resident, with the goal of being a dynamic, inclusive community with a spirit of innovation, growth, and opportunity. Our mission and vision serve as a guide as we creatively think through the present challenges and find solutions for our pressing infrastructure needs. Before we get to the pressing Stillwater improvement projects that have been identified, it is important that we have a common understanding of the funding challenges that we face as a municipality. These challenges contribute to the revenue environment in which we work, so they are imperative to this conversation. Oklahoma is the only state that does not allow ad valorem or property taxes for general funding, with the exception of the newly passed Public Safety Protection District Act, which we will discuss later. Therefore, making Oklahoma the only state where municipalities rely primarily on sales tax collections to fund city government operations. Also, revenue has remained relatively flat over the last 6 years, and it does not increase enough to fund additional major projects needed. Sales tax revenue for Stillwater was $28.5 million in 2015 and a total of $28.1 million in 2020. Despite the flat revenue, price of consumables has gone up, making projects and services cost even more. And now another challenge is unfunded state and federal mandates. One example is America's Water Infrastructure Act of 2018. Due to this mandate, Bill Millis and his team needed to develop a risk assessment and emergency response plan for all water systems, requiring the city to hire a consultant to help with this process, and it's costing $250,000 to meet the new requirements. Changing regulations is also something that affects our budget. James Driscoll, the Water Utilities Director, and his team, they're dealing with the new lead and copper rules guidance re-released, which tightened the allowable lead and copper. This new regulation requires us to build an inventory of service line and material of both the city side and the customer side of the pipe, which costs staff time and possible remediation not previously accounted for in the budget. With the limited revenue bucket and the additional pressure on that bucket from rising costs, new regulations, and mandates, we also have an aging infrastructure and growing community. Our community is steadily growing, which is a great thing, but our infrastructure is simultaneously aging and presenting challenges as we try to meet the needs of the increased use. All of these challenges lead to more pressure on the budget when revenue streams remain flat, leaving less dollars for critical core services mandated by state law and city charter. Understanding these funding challenges is to know the landscape in which we are working, and therefore allows us to make good, effective decisions in how to move forward. Several pure infrastructure projects have been identified that need to be addressed, one of those being Fire Station number 2. In order to keep up with the growth of our community, respond to emergencies quickly, and utilize the station to its fullest capacity, it is imperative that we build a new fire station. Chief Estery is here this evening to answer any questions you may have about this project at the end of the presentation, but this video will give you a glimpse into why Fire Station number 2 is a pressing Stillwater improvement project.
Stillwater Fire Station 2 was built in 1938, and that was the first phase. And the second phase was finished in 1999. And Stillwater Fire Station 2 is an iconic piece of Stillwater history. You go around all kinds of shops in town and you see pictures of Fire Station 2, Old Central, and it's part of this community, it's part of the heart and soul of who we are. This station is a home to a lot of history in the fire service. There's been a lot of iconic firefighters that have come through this program here at OSU and have actually served in this station. So there's a lot of history and a lot of great memories in this location. So we have 4 fire stations in the city of Stillwater, and the way Station 1, 2, and 3 sit, there's some of the overlapping distance or some overlapping boundaries. So if we were to move the fire station, this fire station west, we would be able to respond faster to the west part of town. Plus we'd have easy access to the corridors that go all the way around the city and easy access to Stillwater Airport. We've been in this station for 83 years and it just no longer fits our needs. It doesn't. This design of the station is just very far behind the national standard for fire stations. Even though this is an amazing part of town, and it's really one of my favorite parts of town just because of where it's at, but that also makes it very challenging from a response perspective because traffic is always busy day and night, and there's no traffic lights to help the firefighters get in and out of the station. Whoever calls 911, if you have an emergency, we should be at your emergency within 4 minutes travel time. But as we're pulling out of the station, we run into a lot of congestion with the traffic and people don't want to stop. The building itself, being 83 years old, we have foundational issues, we have lead paint, we have asbestos throughout the building. The doors, the bay doors, we have 4 of them, and they're old design and they're very slow to raise, and with the modern standards, the doors open up much faster so we can be out of the station a lot quicker and get to the emergency, which improves our response times and gets people help when they need it the most. As the trucks are backing in, there's not an exhaust capture system, so you have diesel fumes coming into the station. They're being held in the station and it's actually going into the living areas. The station's not built energy efficient, so it's nowhere near a green facility. The insulation's not adequate, there's gaps above the doors, it's hard to heat and cool, so it's very inefficient from an environmental perspective, plus a comfort perspective. The layout is just not suitable for modern firefighting and modern safety standards. First of all, location. If we can go west of here, We can put the station in a location that's going to give us better response times for that area of town. It's going to divide the fire run districts up in a better way so we can improve our NFPA standard times. We can hopefully improve our ISO rating. But ultimately, when somebody calls for help, we can get help there faster, and that's what we're here for. Having a station where we can put health and safety as our first priority, and we can protect our firefighters from the diesel exhaust, and we can give them a place where they can decontaminate, and they can shower, and they can do all the things they need to do to stay safe and healthy, and then they can move into the living quarters where they're not bringing those contaminants back with them. This building has served its purpose. It has been an amazing fire station for the city of Stillwater and for Oklahoma State University. But after 83 years, it's just not cost effective to renovate this current building. Not to mention, it's not even the right geographic location. Let's pretend it was, it's still not cost efficient to do that. It's going to be more cost efficient to build a brand new fire station in the place that we need it the most. As firefighters, our mission in life is to keep people safe, and not just keep them safe, but make them feel safe. And right now is the perfect time to really to make a move to build this new fire station and really build a path to the future. And because Stillwater has just tremendous amounts of history and tradition in the fire service, and this is a path to continue that and bring it to the next level.
In addition to Fire Station Number 2, our animal welfare is in dire need of a new building. Much of what animal welfare does happens behind the scenes while offering a critical service to our community. Captain Royce Stevens is here this evening to answer any questions you may have about animal welfare, but this video will give you a glimpse into why this also is a pressing project.
In 1984, though, we built the current facility that we have now. It was built as a animal welfare building. They partnered with the Humane Society at that point. Within 10 years or so, they had leased out the other half of that building as part of that partnership with the Humane Society. So basically, since its inception, animal welfare has occupied the south half of that facility down there. We'll bring animals in. We vet them, get their vaccinations, microchip them. We'll try to reunite them with the owners, or we will put them up for adoption in our shelter. Last year, we adopted out about 700 animals through our shelter. The remainder were given to other rescues, like the Humane Society. And the reason they would go to the Humane Society is because they've been in our shelter too long. We've run out of space, which we quickly do at our shelter because it is so small. It was too small when it was built in 1984. The mission of our animal welfare, basically they have 4 jobs. Enforcement, education, reunification, and adoption. There are people, unfortunately, out there who can't take care of their animals or don't want to take care of their animals properly. And I have 3 full-time animal welfare officers and a full-time animal welfare supervisor who, that's their job day to day. One of their main duties is enforcement. People don't understand how to take care of animals. There's people out there who don't have dog houses. Our animal welfare officers will go out and they'll take donated dog houses and give to people so their animals have shelter. The dog may look undernourished, and they'll educate people on how they need to feed their dog and what they need to be feeding. We have a lot of stray dogs. They pick up a lot of dogs. We get calls every day, hey, there's a dog running loose here, there's a cat over here under my porch, whatever it is. And they'll go take those animals, they'll bring them in. Hopefully they're microchipped. If they've been through our facility, they're microchipped. They're gonna try to reunify that owner with that animal. And then lastly, adoption. We have a large number of surrendered animals here, or animals that no one claims. Our current facility is totally outdated and inadequate. It's way too small. In fact, it was too small when it was built in 1984. The layout of the facility is inefficient. We have inadequate space for our employees, for storage and supplies, and we have no space for visitors whatsoever. The building infrastructure is outdated, the facility's not ADA compliant. On top of all that, we don't have space for our animals. For instance, our kennel holds about 20 dogs, and we take in more than 1,000 dogs a year. There's a quote that's often attributed to Gandhi. It says, if you want to know how a society treats its people, see how they treat its animals. And frankly, right now, if you went to our animal welfare, you'd go, man, what do they value about people here? Other towns that we compete with for employees, that we compete with for fellow citizens, it's shocking to me how far behind the city of Stillwater is when it comes to our treatment of our animals in our animal welfare centers. I know the city of Stillwater and the citizens of the city of Stillwater support our animals and the efforts of people like our animal welfare officers. The past month I've traveled around the state and looked at several buildings. I've looked online at some, and I've made site visits to 4 of them, which I thought would be similar to what we'd be looking at. It's not so much just getting a better facility. It's a place where you get to host events. It's a place where you get to educate the public. I would plan to have a education room in there where Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and, whatever homeschool groups can go in there and visit the Animal Welfare Center and learn what they do and learn about animals. So a nice education place. But it makes it someplace inviting for people to go in, spend time with an animal, and reconnect, or be able to connect animals with people. Great facilities for the animals, clean, easy to keep clean, just really nice facilities. And when you look at that, it just kind of gets you excited. You think, well, we can do so much better. That's what you really see when you look at our facility, and then you go visit somewhere like Yukon or Edmond or Broken Arrow was another good facility. You go and see those, you can see how much better we can do for our animals and how much better we can do for our employees, and that's exciting. We could build something that would really be a showpiece for our city.
It'll be of no surprise to anyone that transportation projects made a list of pressing projects for Stillwater. We hear the most from citizens about the conditions of our roads. Monty and his team are utilizing the current half-cent sales tax to fund our pavement management program and has a plan to address those streets. What is listed on this map in front of you are the streets, sidewalks, and other multimodal projects that need to be addressed but are currently unfunded. About $68.5 million worth of improvements. In order to keep up with our growing community and maintain safe and quality streets, we need additional revenue. Monty Carnes, our chief engineer, is here this evening to answer questions you may have about this project as well. Public safety is critical to our community. In fact, all of priority number 3 in our updated strategic plan is safe community because it is a core service of the city. We have a unique opportunity to generate revenue for public safety because of Senate Bill 838, which permits municipalities to establish a public safety protection district. By establishing this district, 5 mills could be collected from ad valorem tax and potentially generate approximately $1.9 million each year for police and fire operations. Currently, 80% of the general fund revenue sources goes towards police and fire, so this additional revenue would definitely help. It is also the first step made by our legislator to allow municipalities access to ad valorem tax for operations. A critical piece of this process is public engagement. We want to hear from residents about their thoughts and their reactions towards the pressing projects identified by staff, as well as learn from them about additional needed projects. Intentionally using platforms like Speak Up Stillwater, Flash Vote, social media, and our website will generate feedback, but we also hope to have community meetings, one in each of the quadrants in Stillwater as shown on this map in front of you. The goal of the community meetings is to hear from a variety of voices, residents from different parts of town, with different types of jobs, with diverse perspectives. Any sort of success on these projects will be a result of residents, council, and staff working together. Another piece in this process will be developing a citizen committee to help guide this effort. We want a citizen committee that is representative of our community and diverse in perspective. And once revenue is generated, a council-appointed citizen stewardship committee will be formed to provide watchful and responsible care of dollars spent on the identified projects. And this can increase transparency and continue building civic trust. Once the community meetings are held and residents have been given ample time and opportunity to provide feedback, I hope to report back to council with the findings. From there, if council decides to move forward, a resolution would need to be approved in order to get on the ballot. February 8th, 2022 is a general election and would be a great option. Another option is April 5th, 2022. Now that you heard about our current funding landscape, our pressing projects that have been identified by staff and residents, a plan to get the public engaged, and a potential timeline, next will be some information about increased revenue options. Drew Simmons is the Senior Vice President for Public Finance at the Baker Group, and he is here to talk to you this evening about general obligation bonds.
All right, good afternoon, and I want to just thank everyone for your time today. I'll be brief, and I won't drown you too much in the details when it comes to numbers. Before I start, though, I want to say this. City of Stillwater, your trustees, you guys are not alone. As a nation, we're facing major failing infrastructure, and it's just a natural progress that happens when you build things and their life cycle starts to end. Where you outshine, however, is your ability over the years to do most of your projects by cash. And as a fiduciary to the city and its trustees, most importantly its citizens, it's my obligation to make sure that you're making prudent financial decisions, right? And whether that's through paying things through cash or going through more of a debt management type of approach, all options need to be on the table. So I'll give you guys some insight. Some of this is just something to consider from, how do we come to market with issuing bonds, and what are the considerations that are involved from a credit standpoint? Because naturally, investors in the municipal bond market want to know how healthy this community is. Are we going to get paid back, basically, is what municipal bond investors ask themselves. And you guys are in a fantastic position. So as we talked about before, your growth has been phenomenal. Yes, they did do population charts going all the way back to 1880, just a touch before I was born, as you can see. But no, it's been fantastic growth. And, back in 2011, Forbes named Stillwater the 6th fastest growing small city in the United States. And you can see that since then, that trajectory has continued. This is just a peer group analysis that I did. I'm not going to go into every data point, but you're welcome to review this at your leisure. Looking at first things first, other university communities. There's not a lot to pick from here in the state of Oklahoma, but Norman being the most obvious. Also, those communities that share a little bit of the same population density, as well as, and you'll look right in the top quarter portion of your screen where my mouse is at, if you can tell, it says Geo Bond Rating. That is either S&P, Moody's, or Fitch, how they rate you from a credit perspective. And sure enough, coincidentally, all of those that are on the list have a very similar AA minus credit rating that you guys have today. Of course, that's going to go away when you make your final principal payment on your outstanding general obligations bonds that mature next month. So again, I'm not going to get into all the details here, but I did pick out a few of these metrics to look at and compare to your peers in graphical form, so it's a little bit easier to digest. Population and university enrollment. These communities are anywhere from population of 31,000 up to 124,000 in Norman. You can also see their various enrollments by the major university that they serve in that area. Also, just looking at population, right now, City of Stillwater is the third best population growth since 2010 in the list of these peers here. And also, it's a very young community here in the city, and it's obviously tied to our relationship with Oklahoma State University. But the persons 65 years and older are the lowest in the peer group in this mix. And I think that's going to bode well for future growth and needs of future investment in infrastructure. Also, Stillwater performs very well when it comes to high degrees of educational attainment, not unattainment. Very high level of a high school or bachelor's degree and higher. And we're seeing more and more younger populations stay in Stillwater, which will help with our growth. Now, the downside that we see in just the Census Bureau stats is that we do have a high degree of persons in poverty, a low degree of the median income in our community. Now, these are lagging indicators, keep in mind. The Census Bureau just completed their 2020 census last year, but that was only on major MSA districts, state-level data, things like that. So some of this data is back in 2016. So we can imagine that these things are being mitigated, especially we have younger population growth, and that's the opposite of what the nation is faced with. And the nation is faced with an aging population. Most of the baby boomers continue to enter into retirement, and the question is, what's our economic output going to be without more folks entering the workforce? But from an assessed value standpoint, this is the assessed value based on the market values. And when you're issuing general obligation bonds, investors are asking a lot about that, right? If you're telling me that you're going to pay me back by way of property taxes, how healthy is the tax base? How healthy is your overall tax position? And you can see here that we've had a 23.36% increase from 2016 to 2020 in the assessed value of these properties out there. One thing to also keep in mind is that obviously, here in Stillwater, we got a high degree of non-owner occupied residents, right? Where a lot of rental properties, okay? So that's a challenge. But it's also something that on the flip side, when you're issuing a general obligation debt that's tied to this tax base, assessed values generally grow over time. There's been some cases where they don't, but overall they grow over time. They're also not as economically sensitive as sales and use tax revenues, right? So you can imagine that the big question that Norman brought up not too long, or just about a year ago today, is that what's going to happen with our sales and use taxes as a result of COVID, right? We were projecting anywhere from a 25% decline. Fortunately, we had a marginal declines, and so that's a big plus. But the problem is that when you compare that to property taxes, it's just a nice and easy trajectory. Okay, so that's something that we want to diversify into, and you can see that in this chart here. And this is just the overall distribution of your tax collections by type, most of which, almost 90%, comes from sales and use taxes. Again, it performed pretty well even during a very, very scary time through the pandemic. However, it is an economically sensitive revenue source, whereas property taxes are very, very, very stable. You can compare that to your peers and see that Norman has done more general obligation bond issuance, has increased their mill levies a little bit more steadily, and they have a larger chunk, still, pretty wide disparity. And by the way, this is just Oklahoma cities in general. This is nothing unique. But the larger municipalities in the state, it has behooved them over the years to increase their issuance of general obligation bonds to fund those projects. Then lastly, from a debt metric standpoint, these are just some of the metrics that investors look at. The debt per capita is just exactly what it sounds like, right? All of the city's debt per capita, and we're kind of right in the middle of the pack there compared to your peers. From a debt to assessed perspective, that's the overall debt relative to the tax base. It's effectively zero starting next month because you won't have any more general obligation bonds outstanding. And then lastly, I'll say, one other thing, the revenue coverage ratios is very, very high for you guys here at 4.9 times coverage, but that's just tied to your revenue bonds, which we'll discuss at a later time when that's a need. Today is general obligation debt issuance considerations. And the last thing I'll say is that general obligation bonds in the municipal market is pretty much the gold standard, what they see as credit. So from an execution standpoint, when you come and you're trying to come to market and get the best interest rate, right, what do? Well, you look at all of the people that can lend you the money, and those are the investors out there and underwriters out there. And you also want the best possible rating. So when we go through this, I walk management and trustees that need to be involved through that process, getting an updated rating, and where do we think that that's going to be. So we do a lot of hand-holding in that space. By and large, though, City of Stillwater, from a credit standpoint, is doing fantastic. I see you as much better than the AA- rating that you had on your existing general obligation debt. So I think the good news is everything looks really good on paper, as well as everyone's done a phenomenal job with communication, and that's really the big key when you come to market like this, is you have to get the community involved. You have to be very, very clear and transparent with what you're trying to accomplish, and they want to see that. Thank you for your time.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Brady Moore, Chief Performance Innovation Officer. Becky walked us through our current funding situation and some of our pressing community needs. And now that Drew has shown us our financial metrics in comparison to other cities, I want to briefly go over funding options that we as staff have identified as opportunities we would like to just explore and discuss this evening. So on this chart on the left side, you'll see the pressing projects and options for funding at the right. So when we look at column A, the option for funding a new fire station number 2 and a new animal welfare could be accomplished through general obligation bonds. These two items and maybe another project could be voted on separately, and they would equal approximately like $12 to $15 million bond. As we move down the chart, the transportation project funding could come from an additional half-cent sales tax to the existing half-cent sales tax that we already collect for roads. This would bring in an additional approximately $4 million a year to rebuild and repair our transportation infrastructure. And then we show at the bottom of the column the opportunity that we have with what Becky mentioned, the newly signed Oklahoma Senate Bill 838, to establish a public safety district. And if passed by voters, could bring in funds of approximately $1.9 million per year for police and fire operations via property tax. We show this public safety district option at the bottom of each option, A, B, and C, because we feel it's a great opportunity to bring it to the public for voting while we're taking other items to them. And so as we move over to column B, if a GO bond is not the direction that we want to go, we could possibly fund new capital assets like the fire station animal welfare with an additional half-cent sales tax. This could be accomplished with a shorter 4 to 5 year sunset period to fund these projects, or set a longer sunset period to raise funds for additional projects. If this is the option selected and it passes, and we wanted to see these projects started quickly, we could of course look at options for revenue bonds. And again, on column B, we have the same funding opportunities for the transportation projects and with the half-cent sales tax addition. And as well, at the bottom, you'll see the same opportunity for the establishment of the public safety district. For column C, another option is if a GO bond is not the direction to go, we could just do a new half-cent sales tax addition just to fund capital asset projects and transportation projects. This would be a slower option, of course, for funding each project at a $4 million a year revenue. Revenue bonding could be used to get capital projects happening more quickly, but the transportation projects would likely have to wait for funds to accumulate. As Becky mentioned, with any option that passes the vote, we want to establish a citizen stewardship committee to work with staff and council to see that project funding is being properly utilized. This would be an important factor on option C. And again, at the bottom, you have the same opportunity for police and the fire ad valorem funding. And before moving on to the next slide, I should add, in the next few months, staff will be bringing to you the details on addressing probably our most pressing financial project ahead of us. As you're well aware, the Call Water Pipeline and Water Treatment Plant projects that will be facing us here in the future. As we look closer to the details of additional half-cent sales tax and what it would look like for the taxpayer, our current sales tax rate of 8.813% ranks 371 out of 880 Oklahoma communities. If the citizens vote to approve the half-cent increase to 9.313%, that would still just put us 248 out of 880 Oklahoma taxing districts. And it's not shown on the slide, but I'll add it. If we happen to vote up sales tax a full penny, it would put us 98 out of 880. And for a quick real-world example of a half-cent sales tax increase and how it's felt by the taxpayer, on a $150 grocery bill, the current sales tax of $13.22 would increase 75 cents to $13.97. And this slide also shows a breakdown of the proposed half-cent sales tax increase. 4.5 would stay the amount to the state, 0.813% for the county, and an increase to 4% for the city of Stillwater. 2 cents, as a reminder, goes to the general fund, 1 cent to SUA, and an increase to 1 cent for the transportation project funding.
Brady, can you give those grocery bill numbers again?
Yes. So on a $150 grocery bill, The current sales tax is $13.22. It would increase 75 cents to $13.97. Now for the ad valorem tax, or more commonly called property tax. If the taxpayers vote to pass the general obligation bond, this chart shows the additional property tax that they will pay depending on the dollar amount of the bond and the value of their house or commercial property. And for example, for a $150,000 house with a $15 million bond, $41.08 additional tax would be added to their annual property tax bill. For a $300,000 house, it'd be additional $84.71 for that same $15 million bond. And this, again, is their annual property tax bill. And I'll add that these numbers are accurate based on today's values, but the calculations can change slightly as values, assessments, all those other factors are taken into consideration and change. You may have noticed the time logo displayed here and other spots in this presentation. We wanted to come up with an identifying name for these projects, similar to the known MAPS projects in Oklahoma City. This title and logo can obviously be changed. We just wanted to create an identifying brand to build upon for future City of Stillwater projects. And for the acronym for TIME, we came up with Together Investing in Municipal Excellence. Of course, we're open to suggestions. And to wrap up this presentation so we can begin the discussion part of this evening, as Becky mentioned earlier, we have all the experts in the room that can answer any questions that you have. We want this to be a productive conversation about the next steps that we can take as a community to tackle some pressing needs. And at the end of this study session, we would love to have your blessing as a council to take this to the community, to hold public meetings and let citizens give feedback on what projects they would like to see accomplished and how they would prefer to have these projects funded. Again, we'd like to hear your questions, your feedbacks, your opinions, and your guidance on the next steps in moving these projects options forward. And I think we can all agree that we feel like now is the right time, pun intended. This concludes our presentation. I'll take a seat unless you have questions for me, but we have all the experts in the room ready to take your questions and have a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. All of you who presented. That was a lot of really good information and great, I think, organization to it, and well-produced videos, and really nice job. I appreciate that.
Mary, during the meeting, I've gotten a couple of texts, if I may point out a couple of things.
Sure.
I may need Mr. Dorman's help, but there is a provision under Oklahoma law where cities can move judgments to the tax rolls. And I'm not sure how much of that we have on the books, and it's a complete surprise to John, and I don't expect him to know. But
there's any judgments, so there are a few spread on the sinking fund, which is it's collected over a 3-year period.
okay, but somebody wanted me to point out that the city did have that capability.
Okay.
And the other thing that I want to point out is that in the chart that Brady gave you, that is simply an example of how it might be funded. We tried to come up with every possibility. That's not a suggestion at this point. It's just to point out that there are a number of options that can be used to fund.
That was going to be my first question. A, B, and C aren't the only things.
No.
Yep.
And finally, those 3 projects are what staff has come up with. The idea is to go to the citizens and see if there are other projects that they have more interest in, or through the community meetings.
All right. Well, counselors, questions, thoughts?
Well, I'll just say that the fire station, animal welfare, transportation, well, those were presented by staff. There was some community input, lightly, with the, am I on? Can you guys hear me? With the online tools we received some feedback from citizens regarding these, so there is some preliminary data that these are important to the citizens.
Yeah, they're not new.
Well, and I don't think there's
No.
any doubt that we hear a lot about the streets.
All right. I think that's a safe bet that those will be on there.
I would, I don't know if Chief Esri's the right person to ask, but I'd love to hear about what the options are if we don't build a new fire station. I mean, how much longer is that a viable option for us? I mean, if people choose not to pass a bond to build a station, where do we go from there? I mean, I guess the question is, do we really need to invest some money in renovating that if we can't build a new one? I mean, what are our options?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Mayor, Council. Thanks for having me. To answer that, probably the simplest answer is, I believe in 2004, 2005, there was a study done by, I believe, Chief Bradley at the time, and he looked at the possibility of renovating that station, and because of the architectural style of the campus and the historical status of the building, it was going to be about $4.5 million in 2004. And as you can imagine, that price has gone up astronomically. So being a building that we lease, I don't see that as a good investment, even if we could afford it. And plus, with where it's at, again, the geographic location is great from a community standpoint, but from a strategic standpoint, moving west would give us the best response profile for our NFPA ratings, which National Fire Protection Association, which ties into ISO and ties into homeowners insurance rates and all the above. So, and again, to add on to the list of reasons to move that station, the parking there is, because of the great location, it's hard to park anything, and other than parking in the bay, the apparatus, there's no parking for other people that come there to train. There's very little parking in the back, and it's landlocked. So I think my recommendation, it's just not the best location, and $4.5 million in 2004, and I can't imagine how much that would be today.
I mean, we'd be spending a whole lot of money on it either way.
Yes,
Right?
that is
There's
correct.
no-
Yes.
I mean, the other option, I guess the option that we have chosen over the last couple of years since we've been talking about needing a fire station is just to sit on it and wait till it becomes completely non-functional. I mean,
Yeah.
at this point, we're not investing a ton of money into it annually now, are we?
No, that's correct. And the lease runs out in 2038. So we're getting close to that. And to answer the question about how much longer can we stay in that facility, we're about there. We've almost hit the wall.
But one of the things that I would point out that always has concerned me, well, a couple of things that have concerned me. We've done studies on that building for hazardous materials to our personnel on a couple of occasions, and the plumbing, the whole thing is just getting worn out. And I applaud our firefighters for living under the conditions that they're living in. They're not great, and I would encourage citizens to go take a look. The other thing that really concerns me is that the ceiling on that apparatus floor is very thick concrete, and if what has been the trend, those apparatus get bigger, you're not going to be able to get them in that building, period. If you go back and look at that video, you've got maybe a foot clearance.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. In fact, the new ladder truck that will be here in a few weeks is, because of its design, it's actually 7 inches taller than the current ladder truck, so it will not fit in that building.
Professor, I know this is kind of a can you predict the future question, but just hypothetically, if we don't have a plan in place for construction of a new fire department, and fire department or firehouse number 2 goes out of service, what does that do to our coverage in terms of response times and to our ISO rating at large?
That would, anticipating what would happen in the future, our ISO rating would suffer. Response times would decrease. And it's also with where we are we have 4 fire stations total. And if we were to absorb the equipment that is currently at that station into the other stations, the walls would be busting at the seams. Not just from a residential standpoint of where are we going to have firefighters sleep and accommodate them in the living areas, but we just don't have room for the equipment. So we'd have a lot of very expensive investments in our community sitting out in the weather.
You were talking about your response rates and being 4 minutes being a typical response. Do we have any metrics or data that tell us that the response rates from that particular firehouse are slower, that we could show to the community?
We do. We do actually have those maps. Been working with Aaron Kelly and IT in June, and we have, using GIS, we have mapped those things out so we could absolutely show them and how that looks. Yes.
Has there been discussion of potentially just adding a Station 5, keeping 2 as a central station and putting a Station 5 out on the western edge of town, maybe being able to build something smaller that's new? I mean, is Station 5, is a 5th station somewhere in our future anyway?
I think it is. Yeah, I think a 5th station is definitely where we want to be looking. Even if we move this currently, move Fire Station 2 to the west, northwest, there's still going to be an area on the east side that doesn't really fall within that 4-minute response time frame. So in the future, that's something we definitely should be looking at.
Did you say that moving Station 2 west would cause that, or it just
no,
won't help it?
No, it would not cause
there.
that.
Okay.
That exists currently.
Okay.
Yeah, the relocation of Fire Station 2 will not cause that, no.
So if we had a new fire station on the west side of town, would keeping Station 2 as some sort of operational station be viable or worth it, or is that something we'd want to consider, or would it just be redundant?
I think it would be redundant, yeah. To have Fire Station 2 where it currently is, and then to have a Fire Station 5 west where we're discussing building the new station. I think it would be some overlap.
Okay. There's always discussion, too, of the concern about what happens to that building. You mentioned in the video how iconic it is in the city. And we lease it from the university, or we leased it 100 years ago, or close to 100 years ago from the university, right? So if we stop using it, it goes back, correct?
Absolutely. That building, like we said, that's important to the community. People have, including myself, I have a lot of great memories there. And I didn't even go to school at OSU in the Fire Protection Society, so I can't even imagine how much nostalgia people have for that building, as they should. So that building will go back to OSU, and I don't know what their plans would be for it, but I'm sure they would put it to good use.
And they wouldn't tear it down?
I can't imagine that happening now.
It's on the National Historic Register.
Okay.
They would have a very difficult time tearing it down, and I can tell you that in talks with OSU administration, there are people who are lined up to claim that building.
Yeah. Make a great fire museum.
It would. Yeah, it's a beautiful building. It was 83 years old.
Sure.
Well, in fact, the matter is that there's a music section on the second floor?
There is, yeah. I'm not sure what part of the band practices on the second floor, but I'm sure that the guys, the men and women that stay at Station 2 can tell you exactly what instruments those are. I have no doubt. Yes.
They do that now?
Yes, sir.
It's currently used by the...
They do, yeah. They took part of Station 2, and they actually have an exterior stairway on the west side, and that's how they access their practice room.
Is that just not part of our lease? We don't have control of that, or you're just happy to let them practice? How does that?
I'm unclear how that happened, but it's there, and
firefighters don't need sleep. Play away.
Well,
I think they are respectful. I think by midnight they stop practicing for a couple hours.
All right. While you're up there, do you have thoughts on the fire or the public safety ad valorem district? Is this something that you all have looked at at all? And
we have looked at it, and because it's been so challenging to fund fire and police because of the way Oklahoma has historically been tax-wise, this is exciting that we have this opportunity to add to our capabilities and actually supplement what we do without it being such a burden on the city. Because what we do is expensive, but I think that obviously as a citizen here with kids, it's absolutely worth it. So to have this possibility, because I understand that we have to bring it before the people and it has to be voted upon, but this is tremendously exciting that we even have the chance to be talking about this. Because a year ago, I didn't think that we would be, but here we are.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's worth mentioning as well, again, I don't know how many times we've mentioned this up here, but going back to how all of this kind of intertwines, how we're not just looking at things in isolation. When we talk about things like response rates and ISO ratings, I mean, that certainly is a metric of our safety response and how well we take care of our citizens, but it also has a very monetary undertone to that. I mean, that affects people's homeowners insurance rates.
It does.
Very directly.
Correct.
And so the more efficient, the more adequate our safety responses, the more it pays off, not only from a safety perspective, but also from a financial perspective
Yes.
for our citizens. So.
Yes, definitely so. And there's one other aspect that I didn't include, but when you talk about recruitment and for the fire service, it's hard to get people into the fire service, qualified people, and it's even harder to keep them once we get them here. But facilities are a big part of keeping those great employees here with us. And of course, once they're vested and they become part of the community, then they're sold. I mean, Stillwater is Stillwater, and you don't leave. But to get them here and get roots, those things are important. So that's another factor to consider.
We appreciate you being here. Appreciate your
Absolutely.
time.
Thank you all for your time. If you have any other questions, just let me know.
Counselors, other questions, discussions on this item?
Are we just talking fire station still, or are we moving on to more general?
Everything.
I really like and appreciate the fact that you pulled together kind of a marketing idea around this. I think can be a really challenging community conversation to have, and I think giving it some branding and some intention is really important. It kind of helps frame all the conversations that we need to have. I really appreciate all of the different experts and folks that are responsible for some of these pressing projects and the time that you took to put those videos together to help us understand more specifically. I know my children have, raised money with lemonade stands for the animal shelter in the past, but until you go and visit and really understand what you're working with and the challenges that you have, I think it's hard for the community to get their arms around, why we would need a new animal welfare building. So I really like the branding. I like the intention that went with that. I do think and I know you have a plan for community engagement. I think that community engagement is so very important. I love that you gave us some ideas for things that we need, but would also really appreciate hearing from the community in terms of what they would like to see. We have kind of a nuts and bolts kind of infrastructure package, I think, kind of put together right now as ideas, and those are really important, but I'd be interested to know if there are other types of projects that the community sees a need for. So I'm thankful that you're going to be out kind of in those quadrants to hopefully capture a really good representation of our community in those areas, not just all kind of one part of town. I think probably different sectors of our population have different thoughts on that. I do also think, and I appreciated your presentation today, giving us some background on our financials and everything. I think that's a really important part of the education campaign with the community to help them understand what this actually is. I think most people, maybe that just bought a house, that are just paying property taxes for the first time, don't really understand how those property taxes are broken down and what ad valorem tax is. I think there's a lot of education perhaps to do in the community when we start talking about mills and things like that, that language starts to get very challenging, and I think people could shut off pretty quickly if they don't see the real time impact of what that is. I think the chart that you showed that kind of shows what the impact would be from an ad valorem perspective, but also the receipt example from a sales tax perspective is really helpful and important too. I think, we've seen some really great examples in Oklahoma with the MAPS initiative in Oklahoma City, and I think Woodward is another one actually that had a penny sales tax that was associated with capital projects. We've seen some really great things happen in Oklahoma communities when citizens choose to invest in themselves in this way. And I hope that that's a part of our education plan moving forward, is helping people see that it's hard when we look at these types of budget items. You can relate it to your family's budget, right? We all have projects that we'd love to get done at home that we either have to save for or hope we get some big family donation or something that helps us make those bonus or something that helps us make those things happen. And that's kind of where we're at from a municipal perspective as well, trying to make those decisions about how we do that upkeep, whether it's on our transportation or some of our other infrastructure, and where those kind of bigger pockets of money can come from. I think people can understand it at that level. It's just really capturing their imagination on what we can do as a community moving forward.
Going back to those sort of the charts that Drew showed, I was struck by the fact that, comparing these other university towns at some level, Stillwater's population of 50,000-ish is just barely double the student population of 24,000. None of the other towns, Norman has 31,000 students out of 124,000 people, right? So, the ratio of general population to student population in Stillwater is really high compared to the rest of these communities. And I think that plays a little bit into our income numbers and our poverty status numbers. But I think it also is something we've got to take into consideration when we talk about how we raise money in this town, because we don't have, half of the people who live here are college students. And that's not the case. Even in Norman, I was surprised. I would have thought their number was a little closer. But that's just not something that these other communities are dealing with.
Those are really shocking number.
It is. And I think it's difficult because when we talk about sales taxes and property taxes, I think a lot of times people say, well, the students pay the sales taxes, and so they should have a bigger share of funding these things. And they're not necessarily homeowners, so they're not necessarily paying that. But you also have commercial and rental property, listed in this, because those taxes are passed on to the renters, right? And so, getting a sense for how that funding is being broken down and kind of who is paying it, I think is an important part of, as we go through with this education piece, is that sort of say, listen, everybody in town is paying a share of this, right? It's not just one is paid by a certain group and another is paid by another group. I think it would be important to make sure that we're helping people understand that. That no matter what, half the people in this town are college students, and so they've got to, we have to, I think, take that into account.
Mayor, if I may, one other issue with ad valorem is that inside corporate limits of the city of Stillwater, 33% of the property does not pay ad valorem tax. Roughly 33%. It's pretty close. There's the hospital, there's OSU, there's public schools, there's 501c3s. So when you look at that assessed value, that's on roughly 66% of the property that's inside the city limits.
Another challenge in terms of explaining and transparency and collecting.
Maybe this is a question for Drew. Maybe it's a question for somebody else. If we put GO bond money on, you mentioned that we'd be hearing some more about the CAW pipeline. Those would generally be revenue bonds. We pay most of our utility stuff out of revenue bonds. Is there a detriment? Is there something around, bond capacity that if we put, 25 million on a geo bond that affects our ability to go out and borrow if we need to on those revenue bonds in the future? Please, yeah.
So, from a debt capacity standpoint, from the actual dollars that are borrowed in general obligation bonds, there isn't. But cities like City of Oakland City, for example, they have internal policies that they don't want their general obligation bonds to exceed a certain percentage. In their policy, it's specific to the market value instead of the assessed value, so just the actual full, true market value of their parcels. I think just broadly speaking, taking a step back, the indebted levels that you guys have are so very low. And if you move outside, especially the state of Oklahoma, they're incredibly low. And so you really, I think the debt capacity question really has to do with internally what you're comfortable with, because from a risk of investors in the market, for example, feeling as though, because S&P and Moody's and these rating agencies, they have thresholds that if you borrow too much, obviously that and is it done for essential purposes and all that, you could be at risk of a downgrade, but you're nowhere near that at all, and under any stretch of the imagination. You'd have to be looking at $500 million plus at this point to spook markets because of just the sheer amount of debt issuance that's going on nationally.
Okay.
So it's a common vehicle for this stuff, but yeah.
I appreciate that.
One other suggestion that we came up with is that at some point we would have to, if we were going to consider the public safety district issue, we would have to come up with very specific dollar amounts that money would be used for, where it would go, what percentage here, what percentage there, and stick to that. Again, I think that we need to convince the public in anything that we do that if you provide us this revenue, we're going to use it exactly the way that we said. And again, that's one of the reasons for recommendation for the council to eventually appoint a oversight committee.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and probably maybe separate ones for those different types of funds that we're bringing in.
Right.
I think there's really good precedent for that too across the country, but also just locally. I know the MAPS program has different task force associated with it that kind of do some tracking and accountability, some stakeholder groups that continue to go to that. So I think it just builds that transparency, right? I mean, I think that's really important when you're talking to the community about investing in itself. They need to understand kind of where those dollars are going and have that accountability moving forward.
I have one, I think, last question about how does money get spent, and maybe this would, if we're looking at a half-cent sales tax to increase our transportation project funding, that's money that we currently on the half-cent sales tax we spend after we collect it. Right, so we collect it, we look at the projects we need to do, and then we spend it. It's all debt-free in that sense. If we're talking about using a sales tax to fund those capital projects into the future, that's $62.5 or $70 million, whatever it is, we would be doing it the same way, right? We would be building up a fund out of that half-cent sales tax and then doing those projects once we had collected enough money?
There's actually options.
Okay.
So we have a finite capability at the city to design and manage projects. So if you want the most economic way to go, then it would be to say that we're going to hold that money in-house and build that up, and our staff will do the design, they'll do the construction management, that kind of thing as the project goes on. However, if the citizens and they're clamoring for the roads to be fixed, it may be that you want to pass or engage with a revenue bond. That money would guarantee repayment of that bond, so that you could hire outside engineers, you could hire outside project managers, and you get a faster
Yeah.
movement on those construction projects.
Yeah, that was
So,
we
a
were
couple of
talking about
options there.
$7 million for the, I think it was $7 million on the western, the major rest. So if we're saying, well, we're gonna save up for 2 years and then go spend the $7 million on western, that's, I think, not very quick. People aren't gonna see how that's advancing very quickly.
Yeah, you're correct. Do you want to make a big splash, or do you want to stretch the dollars as far as you can go? When we looked at bond issues 3-4 years ago, and we were talking about transportation getting half the dollars, I ran the numbers, and I've forgotten, how many projects we could do. We could do very few, and we pay them out over 20 years. And I looked at that amount of money and just was amazed at what the interest was. Mm-hmm. And that's when I got to thinking, well, shoot, if we did $4 million in that 15 years, we can do all of them, as opposed to taking 20 years to do a fourth of them. So it's a balance between how quick you want to do it and how much interest you want to pay to get it done that quick. And that's a discussion obviously the community needs to have and would have with advisories, committees. It's why I'm excited about the two committees, one to help us with projects and one with the stewardship of the dollars.
Yeah.
Well, it'd be nice if we had the value of time at this point. If we were having this discussion 30, 40 years ago, we could say, well, maybe we can save up some money and get some of these things done. As it stands now, our half-cent sales tax at $4 million a year doesn't even cover the maintenance of our transportation infrastructure.
That's correct.
So
That's correct.
if we're talking capital expenditures, we're going to have to come up with something. Right.
Yeah. And a couple other things in there too as well. You kind of mentioned time values. One, what's inflation going to do to your costs? Mm-hmm. There's also, if you hit the market with a whole bunch of projects, it's just like any other commodity. If you become you're going to pay a higher price because people are going to bid, well, if I don't get this job, I'll get the next one.
Yeah.
So you drive those construction costs up. So again, it's a very complicated thing to look at.
Well, I think it depends on what the interest rate is at the time as well.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
There are so many factors that enter into this that
And how much?
And the price of commodities.
I was going to
And the
say how
price
much
of
money
commodity.
the federal government prints and just gives to us for infrastructure projects, right? Isn't that what the? We're waiting for that.
Yeah, we're not holding our breath on that one.
Okay, my last question is just about the process and sort of the community meetings. Is this all stuff that you guys as staff are going to be doing? Are we looking at bringing other folks in to help? Is this like, give me a little bit more detail on how you expect to kind of how that process will go?
Well, our hope is that staff would lead the meetings, but bring in whoever is needed to help with the discussion topics. So really looking at the different quadrants and seeing who can be our community hosts and where can we be located in the community so that the most diverse type of residents can come. We want everyone to come, people that don't usually share their opinions. So my thought is if we have these 4 different meetings, at least 4, have a lot of the same people that you see in this room, a lot of the same material, but with some educational pieces and make sure that it's really well done and articulated, but also just creating a space to get a lot of feedback from our residents.
Okay. I'll go on record and say I really like the time thing, logo, and I like the acronym. It makes sense. It's catchy. It's got some, so
Good.
I'm on board with that for sure. What else, counselors?
Let's do it.
I
Ready to go.
do think it'll be really important to be really transparent about what each of these pieces mean. I actually dug out my property tax and started looking at all the millage stuff and was thinking, okay, what does 5 mills add? And so that's, bonds, what the increase in the bond would be in terms of payments plus 5 mills plus a 0.5 cent sales tax increase. I mean, so kind of giving people a cumulative this is what we're looking at so that they're clear and it's transparent, I think will be important. I understand my property tax bill a lot better now after doing that.
Well, as Drew mentioned, the one bond we have falls off next month.
Right.
So that millage rate goes down.
Yeah.
Before we close, I also want to point out, Brady, I will say this again because this has come up multiple times in the past, that Stillwater sales tax doesn't even breach the top quartile of cities in Oklahoma. I've heard it reiterated multiple times that we can't increase sales tax because Stillwater's in the top 3 or top 5 or whatever it is. We're not even in the top 25%. And if we increase with our half-cent sales tax, we're still not in the top quartile. So I just want to put that out there face front, that we're nowhere near the top sales tax rate in the state. So thank you for putting that in there, because that's sometimes a point of contention.
Yeah. And I guess the thing I would want to reiterate for anybody watching this or listening or writing a story about it or whatever it is people are doing with this meeting, the funding options that are listed here and the projects that are listed here are for example only. They're not set in stone. We're not proposing this at this point. We're not saying this is the only thing that could possibly be done. But it's the starting point of the discussion and saying this is kind of certainly things that we see as needs, and there are possibilities of ways we can fund them, but we really, really do want to hear from the public on other projects that they think are, worthwhile and that they think they would love to vote for, or other ways of funding those projects. And so, these are not proposals at this point. These are just starting points of the discussion, and we really would love to have a robust community discussion about this so that if something does come to a ballot in February or April of next year, that there is a strong community support already built around what those things are, because they grew out of community discussions and not just out of staff or the council saying, let's put this on there. So participation and bringing your comments and bringing your feedback is going to be vitally important in making this thing a reality.
I think go ahead. Norman.
The other thing that we recognize is that Stillwater is kind of different in the summer, and people are gone a lot and they take vacations. So this is something that we would kick off in earnest in the latter part of August to start marketing the meetings and get those arranged. So, sure.
I think it's so important when you look at a task like this that you start building champions of whatever the decisions are that the community looks to fund. I think that's how we do this, right? If we're going to invest in our community together, then we need to build champions in our community and give them the information that they need to be those champions of our community. And I think you laid a great groundwork today, but I think each of us in the room has our own personal responsibility to talk about this often with our peers and our friends, and start kind of listening, and hopefully we'll build some organic champions out of those conversations.
Yep. Yeah. So thank you guys again for the presentation and for the work that's gone into it to this point. It's impressive. You guys have, everybody here has done a good job of putting together this information and providing some clear numbers, clear needs, and I think it will be well received, or at least it will be, something the community can see as a good starting point for those conversations. So we appreciate all the work. What else, counselors? Well, there's nothing else on the agenda. Unless you guys just want to hang out, I'll ask Patty to call the roll on an adjournment. We need a motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. And now Patty will call the roll.
Mayor Choi?
Yes.
Councilor Whitler?
Yes.
Councilor Johnson?
Yes.
Councilor Hollins? Yes.
With a vote of 4-0, the Stillwater City Council meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all.
Are voting buttons broken?